So item number 10 is the Hurricane Recovery follow-up with the Federal Interagency Recovery Coordination, the IRC team. And we have Leda, Khoury with FEMA here today to speak to us about that. The purpose is to provide updates on federal resources and responses from the Interagency Recovery Coordination team to CHNEP member comments and recovery assistance needs after our recent hurricanes of Helene and Milton. The CCMP connection is public engagement activity to strengthen partner collaboration and education and engagement programs, as well as the new activity 3.2, bring partners together, provide resources, and coordinate natural disaster and episodic event response and recovery efforts. All right. Go ahead, thank you.
Hi, Leda. Yeah, if you'd like, there's this podium. It's actually a speaker for those online. So it's catching the.
Oh, okay. Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Yeah, that's why I thought we.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, well, good.
You can advance slides or we can advance slides, so whatever you prefer.
Oh, okay. Yeah, if you can advance.
Okay, we will.
Yeah. Good morning. My name is Leda Khoury, and thank you for the introduction. Certainly, it's my pleasure to be here and provide a short brief on where we are when it comes to the recovery for Hurricane Helene and Milton. So on my role on the current disasters, I serve as what is called Federal Disaster Recovery Coordinator, which means that within the field operations, my role includes leading the team within FEMA that works with the Interagency Recovery Coordination. So once we follow or start working on any disaster declaration, my team will basically do the engagement with not only the recovery support functions, which I don't know if any of you are familiar with them, but it's the 6 primary federal agencies who are the lead coordinators. And we have, I don't know, all of you are familiar with the RSFs and how they work? Okay. So there are 6 primary federal agencies, and they are following what is called the Federal Disaster Recovery Framework. And the framework is the guide that indicates or identifies each of the 6 primary agencies. We have community assistance, which is managed under FEMA. We have economic RSF, which is in most cases, is led by Department of Commerce, but in many cases, Department of Commerce assign the Economic Development Agency to work with us. We have infrastructure, which is led by the United States Corps of Engineers. We have the Human and Health Services, which is managed by Department of Human and Social Services. Now they are also incorporated through Department of Education. So whenever we are talking about Health and Human Services, we also have the Education Department that join us. We also have the Natural and Coastal Resources, which is led by Department of Interior. And we have all these agencies as a primary. And what it means is that whenever there is a disaster declaration, if we are going to be working in long-term recovery with the counties, with the state and communities, we can identify any federal agency through these primary 6, because they're like an umbrella. Within each of them, we can have the reach out to any other federal agency that again falls within these primary six. If there is any agency that is totally outside of that umbrella, my team is the one that can does the reach out and then bring whichever agency is the one that is needed, either to support the state, county, and communities. So where we are in terms of the recovery. The long-term recovery or the IRC team, it typically gets deployed whenever we have major disaster declarations, especially when we talk about level 1 catastrophic events. And that's when, along with all the other components that from FEMA that join the field, my team will come and then we will start bringing these federal agencies to first do the assessment of what the extent of the impacts, where were the areas that perhaps they could provide some kind of support. In addition to the federal agencies, we also work with a philanthropic advisor that works again with my team. We also have an academic advisor, and through them, we're able to do the reach out to perhaps universities or any nonprofits or philanthropic organizations that can help us to advance or provide the support to those communities, counties, or even the state to advance their recovery goals. The idea is that through this team, we're able to, again, provide the direct assistance that is needed. That assistance can vary. It could be in identifying resources, and then resources could be technical, or resources could be grants or any type of financial assistance. Each of these agencies that I mentioned, during their blue sky, they have existing programs. And once we understand what the specific needs are, then our idea basically is to make the connection, not only to that community, but to what would be perhaps the best resource that we can bring. We report directly, or we support directly Florida Department of Emergency Management. Whenever there is a disaster declaration by request of the governor, then the Emergency Management Office of that state, tribe, or territory is the one that connects with us directly. And so any guidance or any things that they would like us to support on, then that's how we start determining our strategies. Once we arrive to a disaster, we go through a process first to do an assessment of what the issues, what the impacts were. And that's what you see here at the bottom when we talk about the timeline. And for the disasters of Helene and Milton, we started in October, right after the declaration was issued. And then the first 3 months is basically utilized not only by these federal agencies, but then by our team to do engagements and try to have a larger picture of where the most impacts and what the major needs will be. From that time, we develop what is called the recovery needs assessment. And at this point, basically, it's a very large overview of what the major issues are. And then we move to what is called the recovery support strategy. And in order to build up this recovery strategy, for instance, in these two disasters, we had the Economic Development Agency who was leading, they were leading what we call the fire events. And we had one with the great support of Jennifer and her team. And we had one in Punta Gorda, and the objective of this fire event, which is the federal interagency recovery exchange. And the idea is to, again, bring many potential stakeholders who can tell us what are some of the needs, and then with the collection of that information, then we can determine where is that we might be able to provide support. Once we completed this recovery support strategy, then our team then moves on to actually what we call implementation, and that is when communities or counties have requested the assistance, then we sit down with them and try to identify what is the range of needs, and depending on that range of needs, then we start working on determining how and where would be the best way to support those communities. Next slide, please. Part of, I would say, one of the core tasks that we have is, again, do the connection to where the grant opportunities are, understanding that each of these agencies have their own set of qualifications, their own set of requirements. When we talk about the IRC, again, the Interagency Recovery Coordination, and we gather all these federal agencies, by us connecting with the community is with the idea to facilitate how to access, because each of these entities have their own set of rules. Some of them are very, and we call them like if you have a chest drawer, and some of them are very easy. You can just pull the drawer, very easy, very clear to find where the grant is, what are the requirements, and what is the amount that will be allowable under the eligibility. But then we have other agencies that is a little bit more complicated, where it's a complex way to access where those funds are, or it's a complex just to understand how to navigate through that, through the requirements they have. And we say for some of them, it's like you need to have your fingerprinted into the log in order to get to them. And I think perhaps some of you who have tried already to apply some of those grants might be related to what I'm talking about. So one of the agencies that I thought will be important to mention today is USDA, because USDA has really is one of the partners that work with the IRC that has a greater areas of service. We usually think of strictly rural areas, but they do, or we think that they have grants and also funding related just to farm activities, but it's not. It's one of the agencies that has probably the most broad type of services and grants that they can provide. So if you were not aware, so USDA announced not too long ago that for the state of Florida, they were going to allocate $23.6 million. Out of that, $17 million were for Helene and Milton specifically. A lot of times when there are disaster recovery appropriations by Congress, it's identified or is attached to a disaster. And that's why that's also very important to know, because again, out of the 23, only 17 will apply to those two disasters. Within the package that was approved, one of them is under the Community Facilities Direct Loan and Grant Program. And there were $4 million allocated to these. And the main target under this grant is going to be to provide affordable funding to develop essential community facilities in rural areas. Then we have the waste disposal pre-development planning grant. That was allocated $10 million, and this one is for several disasters. That is 4680, 4734, 4806, 4828, and 4834. So the numbers are related to the disaster. Each disaster that is declared has a number, and a way to find out what number is to which disaster, a way that you can do that is when you go to the FEMA main website, you can enter the number, or you can enter the name of the disaster or the event. In this case, if it was Idalia, you can type Idalia, and then it will tell you what is the disaster declaration. It will tell you what is the period that was allocated for, and the period means the time that is used as what is called the incident period. That means that any impact during that period is what is going to apply to all the FEMA Stafford Act programs. If I don't know, have any of you familiar with the Stafford Act programs when it comes to public assistance or individual assistance? No? Okay. So that is one of those are the two main areas of support under the Stafford Act. That means that right after a disaster declaration is granted by the President of the United States, then these two programs could be activated, again, depending on the request from the President. When we talk about the public assistance, that means that there are going to be funds that could be applicable to any type of infrastructure that falls within public services. And that could mean the roads, bridges. There are several categories of work. That includes emergency protective measures, includes buildings. So if you have a city hall or fire departments that are part of the city, then they could be an applicant. Also includes parks, water facilities or water management facilities. And the idea is that any of these infrastructures, again, that provide service to the public, will have to go through the process of the public assistance. And then along with the state, then there is an evaluation criteria, and then they determine if that entity that applies is eligible. That also could be for non-profit organizations. So it's not only local governments, but also non-profit organizations that provide service to the public. And then you have the other piece, which is the individual assistance. And the individual assistance will be primarily the program that will be to help the individuals who were impacted. And again, for this program, there's also eligibility criteria. But now we come to what is within my team, which is the IRC. And so once we identify what communities, what counties, the number one requirement is that these local governments or the counties do the request to have the IRC or the community assistance team come and sit down with them to learn what the issues are. We always say when IRC gets involved or supports in the community, it has to be locally led because whenever we bring any federal agency to help on the recovery, it has to be where a partnership. It's not where we will come and just impose what kind of needs or projects might be the ones that could be moving forward for implementation. That's why it's very important is locally. When there is a disaster declaration, many of the local entities will be able to connect through either the state or they will be able to connect with a FEMA, what we call division or branch director. And that's a way that they will, or the local entities can connect to these different programs. And certainly for this particular time, I wasn't going to go over in a lot of details, but if at any point you feel like you wanted to learn more about those programs, certainly we can work with Jennifer and we can facilitate somebody that works on those departments or those divisions to come and sit down with you and talk about what the programs entail in more depth. So again, going back to the USDA grants, there is another one, which is the Special Evaluation Assistance for Rural Communities and Households. And this was to, the target or the goal with this grant was to provide assistance to small and financially restrained rural communities with pre-development feasibility studies, design, and technical assistance on proposed water and waste disposal projects. Then the last one within this 23.6 million was the single family disaster home repair grants. And the amount allocated for that was of $3 million. And again, this is to provide grants to very low and low income homeowners to repair homes damaged during the calendar year of 2022 presidential declared disasters. In addition to the grants that were approved, there were some changes, which include the waiver for age and income requirements, which lowered the minimum age for 62 to 18. Also, it increased the maximum grant from 10,000 to 40,000. And again, this is for the individuals who are seeking help. The goal of this program is to provide loans to very low income homeowners, again, to repair, improve, or modernize their homes, or to elderly citizens with very low income and who owns a home and they need to remove any health and safety hazards. Next slide, please. In this slide, you will have, there are links. Once you click on the link, you're going to be able to go into the actual website. And again, one of the jobs for the IRC is to try to facilitate not only an agency to community, but also to provide information on grants that, again, are available. So we have the Florida Department of Environmental Protection Resiliency Grant Program, and there are multiple grants within this category. For instance, one of them is called the Coastal Partnership Initiative Grant. The next application will start in September. And another example is what is called the Clean Vessel Act. Again, which the idea is that provides the funds to any entities that fall within the target of what wants to be accomplished with this funding. Also, under the, probably some of you are familiar with the Community Development Block Grant Disaster, which was granted by the Housing and Urban Development. And the total amount of this allocated to Florida was $925 million, plus some, the both number is basically $925 million. And from what we understand, the state has already submitted their management plan to HUD and is in review. The last group that you have here is it's a link to what is called grants.gov. And grants.gov is a tool that can help you or any really local entity to do a search of what is within, again, the federal government, because so many communities don't have, they're small, they don't have a grants manager, or they don't have somebody dedicated just to keep up to date with multiple grants that could be available. So this is a tool that can, in a quick way, you can enter. Once you click on the link, then you can have, there is a search box, and in the search box, you can enter the issue that you're trying to resolve. So it could be stormwater management, for instance. And so once you click that, then it's going to pull what grants are currently available specifically for that. So there are different ways that you can do the search. One is by the issue that you're trying to address, or if you are looking for, there are some grants that require a match. There are some that don't require a match. So again, I thought it was important for me to share this for the ones that have not been able or are not aware of such a tool. And in terms of the questions that Jennifer has sent us to try to get information, I wanted to add a few additional pieces that were provided to the state in addition to what I already submitted to Jennifer. So, but before I jump to that, I'd like to ask you guys if anybody has any questions. This is an easy group. Yeah, go ahead.
Have any of the funding's been subject to the DOGE reduction?
So the funding that I mentioned is the funding that was already allocated by Congress. That's the funding appropriated. That covers for some of the funding is allocated for the last 2 years. And now it's a matter of, it's something that was already approved by Congress. And then now it's just a matter of waiting when that money will be released. For instance, USDA already provided their notice of funding opportunities. There are other agencies that are still going through the process internally to issue that. So one of them is the Economic Development Agency, which already had an appropriation, and they're just, again, waiting to finalize their internal pieces because they have to determine what are the areas that they're going to be funded. Just like what they did with the CDP GDR, it was determined these are the areas that the funding should be used for. Anything else? Okay, so then I will move on to the additional pieces of information that I got from the state. And one of the questions was need for updated LIDAR, the LIDAR, and elevation data through the entire region. It says FEMA recently lowered the base flood elevations of their islands and other potentially flood prone areas, thus allowing people to build lower along the coast when the Gulf and ocean water temperature are rising. Sea levels are rising and storms are stronger. For example, the base flood elevation was recently lowered by 4 feet in Sarasota County, AE zone. So the state's response, and when I refer to the state, I mean Florida Department of Emergency Management. They said that there is a new LIDAR flow within the last 5 to 7 years. And they didn't believe that all of this was captured in the mapping updates. If any of you needs to have additional information on it, you can let me know, Jennifer, and then we can try to make the connection with the State Department that handles this type of issue. The other question was need for updated flood maps and storm surge models for the entire region. The answer was that the firm maps are a FEMA responsibility through the partnership with the water management districts. We also have need funding for water storage projects, both for projects that assess water storage capabilities through the region, as well as projects that create reservoirs to store water during the wet season. The answer was that these could potentially be eligible under the HMGP, which is the Hazard Mitigation Grant Program. Again, that is provided from FEMA to the state. And in order to know if any entity is eligible, the state will need to see the scope of work that is intended or desired.
But can I ask a follow-up question there? I wanted to point out to everyone in your packet, there's a comment response form that she's referring to, where we had compiled comments last cycle from both management and policy members with specific comments or concerns or questions. And we sent those to the IRC, and then they provided responses to some of those. And then there's these additional ones, which we'd love to get from you in writing. And then we'll put into the master form that we've been compiling these and re-upload it to the website. But you have the version without these most recent responses in your packet today. The question I had to do with the first thing that you mentioned. So we actually had policy members raise that one to say that they were very surprised about the lowering of the base floor elevations on the barrier islands and felt that that was putting them in kind of an awkward position because they're trying to encourage people to build higher on those islands, to rebuild even higher. And in fact, now, the perception is that they could actually build lower based on FEMA base floor elevations. So were you saying, I was trying to understand, were you saying that it was tied to LIDAR and they believe the lowering of the base floor elevations is appropriate, or are they looking at revisiting that issue of the base floor elevations?
Yeah, so I think what I would like to do is go back to the state and then ask that they provide some clarification, because again, they do work together with FEMA as they're developing this map, but certainly I'm not the expert. The last thing I want is to gear or mislead anybody. So I think this is one that we can have as a follow-up, and then I will make sure that I bring this to the appropriate expertise so that they can give the best answer.
So was it the state then who provided the LIDAR that FEMA then relied upon to lower the base floor elevations? Is that what I'm?
Yes.
Okay.
So, but I can bring again the question not only to the state but then also to FEMA, because there is a hazard mitigation component within FEMA that again work with the state hazard mitigation, and together they're the ones that do any type of development. So that would not be my area of expertise, so I would not want to mislead.
I think, the policy, when we bring this to policy, those individuals who made that comment are probably going to probe that a bit more to understand how that came to be, because they're basically saying they wish FEMA would revisit to look at going back to at least the base floor elevations they had in place for the barrier islands, if not raise them.
Okay.
Because they feel like as local governments, they have limited ability to require more stringent building codes or to justify more stringent building codes if the perception is that FEMA says they're not required or necessary. Do you know what I'm saying? So yes. They're kind of trying to figure out how they're going to encourage people to rebuild higher.
Understand. Yeah. And again, since that's not the area that I.
Right. If you want to bring it to policy, I think that'd be helpful, and then having it in writing, we'll put it in their packet. But that would be very helpful, because I know that several different elected leaders were very keyed in on that.
Yeah, that would be great. And then I will facilitate and bring these to the areas that do work and make the decisions on this. Yes.
I'm sorry, I have a question. You do represent FEMA today, so you have an unthankful task of having to represent questions like this for me. On April 12th, the Office of Management and Budget issued a letter of guidance. It seems through FEMA that recommended material changes to the disaster declarations, economic thresholds. It recommended short and long-term changes to how to get FEMA's funding aligned with some of the other national priorities. It did relate to what I might call a callback of Category G funding eligibilities that sent shockwaves around the beaches communities, that effectively Category G funding for recreational areas would be dropped, which would put the burden on local and state governments for that effort. Can you comment on where, because that memorandum said these are the things that need to take place and they would be implemented by executive order with short term and then a lot of long-term things. But as we approach it was intended to approach the 25 hurricane season.
Yeah.
And so, i.e. Effective the next time we have a hurricane this year. So is anybody willing to comment on, is that actually taking effect? These are recommendations that are still recommendations, but, you know, a couple $1 million at stake here for every local government trying to anticipate whether or not these recommendations are going to actually be implemented. So I was just wondering, what have you heard?
So I think it's definitely a great question. And I think it's not only you, but many are with that concern. However, on my role, I'm not able to provide an answer, but I can certainly be more than happy to add this to the list of questions so that we can facilitate, because my role is to focus on the current recovery process for Helene and Milton. Anything outside of that is being handled by FEMA headquarters on decisions or new guidance that is being developed in accordance to the executive order. So I've been more than happy to take that because it's of concern for local governments, and will submit it to the appropriate individuals or to the appropriate department who perhaps has the ability to provide answer to that.
Of course, thank you.
Yes.
We have a question online. Dana Detmar, if you want to unmute and ask your question.
Yes. Hey, Jennifer, I just had a question. I didn't know if you knew the timing of the changes to the base flood elevation in the Southwest Florida communities. I was just curious if it happened if you know if it happened pre or post Ian, Helene, Milton, because Sanibel, our base flood elevation got changed lower just before Ian, but it was not related to LIDAR data. It was related to our CRS rating, which is a 5 and the highest that you can have. And there are incentives that come along with having a high CRS rating. So one is the breaks financially for flood insurance. And then this was done basically as a way to another incentive for the Sanibel community to keep kind of the foundations of our comprehensive land use plan and Sanibel code, because it obviously costs less for people to build higher than it does to build at a lower elevation. So just some background on why that changed for Sanibel. It happened just before the hurricane, which is untimely, and I don't think we realize the magnitude of what can happen with these storms. And so I was just curious if the other communities, if it was before or after Ian.
That's a really good question. I think that context is really important, and that may not have been fully understood at the policy level as the reasoning behind. I think there was uncertainty as to the reasoning of why the base floor elevations were changed, and the context of like what data was used or who else was involved. Was the state involved? Was the community involved? It was just, hey, they're lower, and that's the opposite of what we're trying to do in the Barrier Islands, which is to get people to build up. But I could go back to those notes, Dana, and get you the more specifics about who said what and what the other. I know that it was not just one. I can recollect there were several Barrier Island communities, policymakers from those various communities who ended up agreeing. So we would have to look back through our notes to get the specific names and context of their comments, but I can get that to you. It would be in our minutes. Okay. So I'll pull it and send it to you after the meeting.
Okay, yeah, no, but I definitely agree. I mean, I feel like it might have been short-sighted thing to do. But just so for the good of the group, I mean, we are still having, people on Sanibel, even though the base flood elevation is lower, now the requirement, we are often seeing people go higher than that on their own.
That's great. Thank you.
Thank you for the questions. Going back to the initial list provided by Jennifer, there was one category that says need for federal assistance with infrastructure improvements. And this is assistance and funding to elevate homes, buildings and roads. Entire neighborhoods were flooded and thousands of people lost their home. These communities will need to be elevated. However, technical assistance is needed to ensure new construction based on new code requirements does not exacerbate flooding on surrounding properties at lower elevations.
Which page is that on? Do you mind?
Page 5.
Page 5. We just want to follow along, so. Oh, I don't know if they're numbered. We'll need to number our pages here. Okay. So under the need for federal assistance with permitting?
Infrastructure improvements, the next category. You have need for federal assistance with permitting, and then the next one is infrastructure.
If you turn to the next one, and I apologize, there's no page numbers, we're gonna have to add that. It says need for federal assistance with infrastructure improvements on the right-hand side. So we're talking about which item, which numbered item under that? Is it 1 or 2? The one that you?
1.
1, okay, great, now we're on with you, sorry.
Okay. So the state provided the following response that the state is implementing Elevate Florida to elevate homes across the state. The application portal has already closed. Other elevation projects, including road elevation, could potentially be eligible under the HMGP, again, which is the Hazard Mitigation Grant Program. But we will need to, or they will need to have a better understanding and the specifics on the scope of work for whatever communities are the ones looking for this type of assistance.
And who was the response from?
The state.
The state of Florida? Okay.
The last one is under the category of need for federal assistance with land acquisition programs. The first question is need funding and added capacity for land acquisition and conservation programs. Agricultural communities have suffered greatly from recent hurricanes and citrus greening. These agricultural lands were serving as floodplains and are fear of becoming developed with impervious surfaces that alter the hydrology and degrade water quality. These are land acquisitions opportunities beyond the scope of both county and state land acquisition programs that would provide benefits to day-to-day stormwater management and help to mitigate against compounded impacts from major storm events. The state's response was that stormwater or drainage programs, drainage projects might be eligible again under the HMGP, Hazard Mitigation Grant Program, including the acquisition of property if it's needed for the project. Again, one of the requests is to have more details on the scope of work of whatever or whichever communities are interested or looking for this type of assistance.
And that was through the state?
Yes. Yeah, all the ones I just read today were response from the state. So with that, I conclude my piece in terms of the interagency recovery, unless there are any additional questions in relation to long-term recovery for communities after Helene and Milton.
We have 5 additional minutes. If anyone has any comments or questions on recovery, maybe things, if you have any outstanding issues or needs.
I guess a general question, if like a lot of these responses say to follow up with like the same person, how would you recommend like the next steps? Like if there's a lot of organizations who need to talk to somebody and they have similar projects, should we get together? Like I'm thinking like SWIRT, like we tried to go through FEMA before for funds and try to apply for projects together. Is that something that like the NEP would kind of foster contacting these people and having other meetings? Or is that something like another entity should be doing on their own? I'm just curious.
I mean, we'd be happy to provide support. I think the reason you see the same person is because that's who we received like specific responses from. And we did get a couple of additional contacts that were added on specific points from other agencies, but not, as many, like USDA is listed most of the time because they actually separately responded. So I think that's something we hope to continue to try to gather these responses. And if we can also have the point of contact of who the response came from, then we can add and keep building this as a resource for the partners. And it is on our Hurricane Helene and Milton page, which we've been housing a lot of the information, the collective information. But if there are follow-up meetings that people would like to have on specific things that, as long as they relate to RCCMP in some way, we would be happy to be supportive in facilitating, setting up side meetings with appropriate contacts to talk about those projects or those initiatives.
Right, that would be a next step that we can certainly be happy to sit down and talk about it. Because in all of these questions, there were multiple communities that were within the same category, but you need to know the specifics of where is that particular need. Is it in the very beginning stage that there is a need, you identified it, or is it at the place where something already started? Perhaps you have a portion of a grant, or perhaps with assistance with the grant writing. So we need to know more the specifics of where they are, because based on that, then we can determine, all right, how can we best assist if we can. So I think that would be important. As I provide my updated version, I can write the answer, who is the one that provided the answer. Then as far as the context, when it comes to the state, I can certainly do that. In regards to the recovery support functions, I will indicate which field coordinator is the one that provided the answer. But once the IRC for the life of the disaster is the one that can be that connector, because these federal agencies, the 6 that I referred to, are in the recovery phase for a certain period of time. Once their time is up, then we, meaning the IRC, is the one that can do the reach back to either the regional counterpart to the federal entity that was assisting or working with us. So that's why if I give you a name, in the case of the federal agencies, that might not be the best way, just because once they demobilize from the disaster, they go back to their regular jobs. But prior to that, they do a transition, and they either could be somebody from the state agency or could be from a regional office that we can do the follow-up.
Thank you very much for all this information and updates.
Okay, well, it's my pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.